welcome everybody. We are so pleased that you're able to join us today. We are pleased to be able to do these executive briefings 4 times a year because we find from the audience that we serve, which is primarily CEOs of private companies, that the issues that they're dealing with are ever changing and they're constant, and we want to be in tune with what they are and present useful content that we think can help them either meet the challenges that they have or better yet, even accelerate their ability to achieve their ambitions. I'm going to be talking about rules for pay systems that reinforce performance standards. So why is Ken Gibson qualified to do that? Well, I'm one of the principals here at VisionLink. VisionLink is a compensation design firm. We were founded in 1996. We're coming up on our 30th birthday. We're headquartered down near the Spectrum in South Orange County, California, if you know where that is. And we've amassed over 1,200 clients and met with hundreds of CEOs and other business leaders over the years about the compensation challenges they faced. Mostly, how do we make sure that we're developing compensation strategies and systems that drive the kind of results that we want as businesses. So what we talk about today in all of these executive briefings are not theoretical to us. They're based on real life clients, people that we work with day in and day out. So things you're going to hear about are going to be presented in that context. So here we go. Let's talk a bit about the state of pay, if you will, in private companies today. When you look at the person that we serve, the CEO of the company, the landscape that they're facing these days, it's in a more accelerated state of flux than I've certainly ever seen it in my career. And I don't have to tell you the reasons for that, AI and all the other technological changes that are happening. But while all of this technology, including AI, is making things a lot easier, it's also making things harder. It's really making the CEO role harder. The markets are shifting faster. Customers are expecting more from the people that are serving them. The talent that they're trying to recruit is more mobile than ever before. Costs continue to accelerate, and AI, while it is a helpful tool, can be destabilizing at the same time. So these CEOs, and if you're one in the audience, I don't have to tell you this, you're experiencing this, you're expected to continue to professionalize your company, but without losing kind of that entrepreneurial edge that's gotten you to where you are right now. So you experience pressure and tension virtually everywhere in the organization, and it is never ending, it never stops. So this leads to a need to attract and keep really high impact talent, people you can completely trust to align with your growth goals and your ambitions and expectations, and then get them to perform in a way that makes sense inside of your company. So that requires you to have a high value employee value proposition that's going to attract that high impact talent and be able to keep them. So how does this impact compensation? Well, while all that's going on, what you're also noticing is that pay is rising usually faster than performance. There's pressure on you to continue to increase compensation, but you don't always necessarily see performance that aligns with the increases that you're making in that investment. So that leads to kind of a dilemma. You have to make decisions that are based on market pressure more than strategic intent sometime. And even when you're trying to be strategic about what you're doing, you're finding it more difficult in the area of compensation than other areas of your business. It just feels like a different animal. Also, you typically have limited visibility into what kind of return off the investments that you're making. I often say it this way: look, I'm paying my top 4 people, pick a number, close to $1 million. What am I getting for it? What am I driving as a result of what I'm paying here? So there's uncertainty about where the compensation systems that you're developing are and putting into place are driving the kind of performance that you really want, the outcomes that you need. And one of the reasons that you have that difficulty is Most CEOs, they lack the information, the insight, the systems, the resources to confidently make the decisions they need to make, that assure them that when I put this in motion, this incentive plan, this compensation offering in general, it's going to lead to the business outcomes that I need it to. So that's the kind of thing that we want to be able to solve today. The starting point is really to define some terms here. What is the role of your company's pay offering? Well, there's really 5 things that at least it should be doing for you. Number one, it's the centerpiece financially of your employee value proposition. It's a major part of what allows you to attract and keep the kind of talent that you need. Number 2, it defines the financial partnership you want to have with your people. And that term partnership becomes important, as we'll talk about later on. It also reinforces role expectations. You want to attract people to a role, not just hire them to a job or even a position, and know that they have a stewardship over certain expectations. And so how you pay them helps to define what those expectations are and how they'll be rewarded if they fulfill those expectations. Number 4, if you do it right, accountability then becomes built into the pay system. The way you pay your people holds them accountable for the certain outcomes that you'll want them to produce, and you'll see how we do that in just a minute. And ultimately, you want to create this kind of unified commitment to business growth, so that people see that by helping the company achieves its financial priorities and its growth objectives, they're going to be able to meet their own as well. So to do that, we've identified today 5 rules for pay systems that reinforce performance standards. And we're going to break each of these down for you. So number 1, you want to define value creation. What does that term mean for your company? Because it's not the same in every company. You want to be able to articulate a clear pay philosophy, which is your rationale for how you pay your people. You want to transition away from incentive plans or incentive compensation to something we call value sharing. We'll explain the difference in our presentation today. Then you want to make sure you have a balanced pay offering. A complete and compelling pay offering is critical in today's environment, and we'll describe what that looks like. And ultimately, you want to be able to communicate a growth partnership to your people that creates the kind of line of sight you want between the company vision, its business plan and model, the roles people have, what's expected of them in those roles, and then how they'll be rewarded for fulfilling those expectations, and how those rewards relate to their own personal ambitions. So let's dive into each of these. Defining value creation. What do we mean by this term, value creation? Well, to define this term, I'm going to use a case study here. Underwriters Laboratory is a company that's been around a long time. I want to say 130 years, maybe something like that. But about, maybe 18 years or so ago, they were in a real stagnant period. They've been growing for, really over 100 years and had become segmented and siloed. They had divisions that were literally almost competing with each other, like they were separate companies almost. So they brought on a new CEO whose name was Keith Williams, was intended to come on and right the ship, if you will. And he did a lot of things, but one of the things he did is he looked at compensation and he said, we're going to align around a certain principle or philosophy that's going to be called pay the company first. And here's what he said he meant by that. Basically, this is a quote from the article that talked about Underwriters Laboratory and what Keith Williams did there. He said, basically up to the company's operating profit target, all the profits are going to go back to the company. And only after that target is met do we start funding an incentive pool. So in this example, he says, let's say our target is $80 million. Well, the 100% of the first $80 million of profit is going back to the companies. In a minute, I'm going to show you something, a concept that's called productivity profit, and that's what he was trying to drive home here. The company has to reach a certain standard before it's in a position to start sharing with its people. Now, once we meet that standard, the next 20 million is going to go into this incentive pool. And then from there on out, it's going to be 50-50 between the company and the incentive pool and how we're going to share. So what was he doing here? Well, he was defining value creation for Underwriters Laboratories. And he was doing it in a way that said, look, we want to share value with you. Here's the threshold we need to meet. And once we do, we can share value. In fact, there's no cap on the value we can share because we've already modeled this out. We understand once we reach these kinds of standards, we're in a position to continue sharing value. There's really not a limit on the earnings opportunities if we can all work together and meet the kind of value creation standards that we need. So what was Underwriting Laboratories' performance standard? Well, it was $80 million in net operating profits. That was its performance standard. And basically what we're saying is this value sharing threshold is the performance standard. And you start talking to your people about what these thresholds mean, why they matter. In just a minute, when I talk about the concept of productivity profit, you'll see even more how this can be driven home. But once you have this concept in mind, you have this idea of value sharing defined. In this case, it was pay the company first. Well, now you can kind of line up compensation around that concept, right? You can develop a formula for sharing value in a way that aligns all of your key producers with the company's business plans and priorities, because everybody understands what it means now to create value for the organization. Now, one of the best ways you can start communicating that is by articulating a clear pay philosophy. Now, pay philosophy is, in some ways, whatever you want it to be. And I'm going to show you some things that it should include here in just a second. But if you have people that are in your organization that come in periodically and they will say complain about their pay, and they have this data they've gotten off of the internet, it shows what they should be paid for their position. They never come in, by the way, and tell you that they're being overpaid for their position. They're always showing you that they're being underpaid position. Those are often frustrating conversations for business leaders, and sometimes they feel like their employees maybe even have a sense of entitlement. They find themselves constantly on the defensive and explain themselves. We tell businesses it's not the employee's fault necessarily that they are challenging that. Usually that happens because you haven't yet given them the rationale for how they're being paid. And the rationale is cleared up by having a very clear pay philosophy. Here's what it might include at a minimum. It's a written statement that defines, that articulates how the company defines value creation, like I just showed you. Then it defines how it's shared and with whom. What are the types of plans we're going to have? Who's going to participate in them? What's going to be the short-term value sharing? What's going to be the long-term value sharing? How are we going to use market pay standards to determine some of that, so we're not overpaying for positions, but we also know that we're being competitive in what we're doing? How are we going to balance salaries with value sharing or incentive plans? And how are we going to balance short-term versus long-term incentives? And how are we going to define things such as merit pay? Now, I could do a whole presentation just on building a pay philosophy, but I'm going to save you that today. Instead, we're going to make this offer to you. Two things. There's a document. In fact, you'll find this under the resources tab. You're right. You can download it right now if you want. It's that PDF you see on the left side of the two images there that kind of explains what should go into a compensation philosophy statement. And after this, after the executive briefing is over today, about 30 minutes later, you're going to get an email thanking you for being here today. You'll have another chance to access that PDF there if you don't get it right now. And then on Monday, you're going to receive another email with a link to our compensation philosophy builder. This is a tool where you can go in. It will take you through a series of questions and literally build a philosophy statement for you. We encourage you to do that. We've been telling people at the start of the year, if you don't do anything else with your compensation this year, establish what your pay philosophy is going to be. You'll be so relieved once you do that, and you'll realize how many problems it's solving for you. So look for that and go through that exercise. We encourage you to do that. And the pay philosophy it gives you may be perfect, but see it as a starting point. Say, okay, I see what this is supposed to be now, and then decide what you want to add or subtract from there once you do that. Now that we understand how we're going to define value creation, and now we've defined what our philosophy is about how we're going to share value, well, how do we make a transition to value sharing, and how is that different than incentive plans? What you want to be able to say to your people is, look, we reward value creators here. In just a minute, I'm going to show you how you might define that for your company in real financial terms. But the company should really promote what we call a wealth multiplier philosophy and rationale. And that is, look, if you help accelerate the wealth multiple in this company, we want you to participate in that. You're our growth partners here. So you're going to participate in the value you help create. It's a very different mindset than an incentive plan that says, okay, if you hit these metrics, then you're going to hit this bonus payout. There's a difference in mindset. There's also a difference in how you construct things, because when you construct incentive plans with a value sharing through a value sharing lens, you're basically saying there are certain standards the company has to meet before we can pay anything out, including any individual performance that you may achieve throughout the year. We may have some spot bonuses and things like that to take care of that. And your individual performance, your team performance will have a factor in it. But unless we meet these thresholds, then we're not going to be in a position to share value. So like Keith Williams said to Underwriters Laboratories, we're in this together, and you're in this together to work together to make sure we meet these thresholds. So one of the things that you want to be focused on is in value sharing is you want your people to understand, what are the shareholder priorities? Well, their priority is profitability, but not just profitability, but specifically productivity profit. How does that differ from just regular profit? Well, it's being able to isolate the profit that is really attributable to the performance of your people. And here's one of the ways that you might think about calculating that. We encourage our companies to calculate a ratio we call ROTRE, return on total rewards investment, that you'll see at the bottom there. How do we get to ROTRE? We do that by really making our compensation account for itself and what it's producing in the business. So the first thing we do is we focus on our shareholders, and we say, okay, our shareholders, let's say we have 3 shareholders in this business, they have capital that's tied up in this business. In this example, we're going to say, let's say that capital account is worth $20 million right now. So that's the shareholder value of the business. That's the equity. That's any other assets that they've contributed. Well, there's a cost to shareholders for having that capital tied up in the business. It's an opportunity cost. If they had that $20 million someplace else, they could invest it, right? Even if it was in the market, they can invest it. So there's a cost to shareholders for having that $20 million in the business. This is one of the things that Keith Williams recognized, and our business needs to recognize, and that opportunity cost needs to be accounted for. So we account for it by assigning a cost of capital. The cost of capital is, what does this business consider the cost to be to shareholders for keeping that capital inside the business? In our example here, we're going to use 12%. We've seen anything from 5% to 30%, depending on how long the business has been in existence, how volatile it is, how much risk there is, and so forth. But just for the concept today, we're going to call this 12%. So if we say our cost of capital is 12%, well, 12% of $20 million is $2.4 million. So to calculate what we call our productivity profit, we're going to say, okay, we're going to take a charge of $2.4 million, and on the books, we're going to subtract that from our operating income before really defining productivity profit. So if our operating income is $10 million, we subtract the $2.4 million, we have what we call a productivity profit of $7.6 million. Well, what does that mean? We're saying, well, that means that the 7.6 is attributable to what? presumably the productivity and performance of our people, because now we've accounted for the cost of capital to our shareholders. But let's not stop there. We can go a little bit further with this. We say, well, what are we paying out right now in terms of our total rewards? Salaries, incentives, sales commissions, benefits, and so forth. And in this case, we're going to just use a round number of $25 million in our sample company. Well, now we have a numerator and denominator, right? So if we divide our 25 million into 7.6, we can say, okay, well, that's a ratio of 30.4%. Often when we do this the first time, our clients will say, oh, well, that sounds pretty good. 30.4%, is that good? Say it's not, it's neither good nor bad. It's now your benchmark. The critical thing is what happens to that ratio over time. And if it continues to increase, that's good. If it decreases, then that's not good. It means your people are not performing quite the way they should, or you're not managing costs effectively and expenses, or both. For some of our CEO clients, this is the most important single ratio they look at every year to kind of get a gauge on how things are going in their business and what they might want to look at next. The critical thing to understand here is that productivity profit should be the source of all the variable payments you make in your business. What I'm calling value sharing, which up till today you called incentive plans. So your bonus plans, your long-term incentive plans, and profit pools and things like that, they all need to be funded out of productivity profit. And this is one of the ways you reinforce performance standards in your companies, is by, number one, teaching the principle of value creation, explaining what productivity profit is, and then holding yourself to those standards before you start sharing value. Now, when you do it this way, what are you essentially doing? You're essentially self-financing the incentive plans of your company. You're paying value out of value that's been created, and you're protecting shareholders in the company in the process. Now, once you have all those concepts in mind, what you want to do is make sure then you're taking a balanced approach in what you're offering your people. And what do we mean by having a balanced pay offering? It means that your compensation offering, it's complete, and the role of each pay component within your plan in relation to the others is coordinated, and it's clear. There's a reason for all of them. To use a football analogy, or use any sports analogy if you want, you have linemen, you have running backs, you have receivers, you have a quarterback. They all have a different role, and every part of your compensation plan also has a different role. In general, we think in terms of 8 components of pay, just to keep the explanation simple. So on the left, you have kind of your pure compensation, your salary, your performance incentives, maybe sales incentives, you have growth incentives. On the right side, you have your benefit plans, your core benefits, but maybe executive benefits. You have your qualified retirement plans, but maybe there's supplemental retirement plans for your highly compensated people. So what you have to be able to do is look at this as, kind of a pie and say, okay, in our company, what's the right mix here? And how much weight should be given to each of these? So if I'm in growth mode as a company, I may want to be at the, 50th percentile of market pay for salary, but the 90th percentile for total compensation, but the rest of that is being made up in various kinds of value sharing plans, as an example. And as I look at every one of these, there's as a company, there's leadership, there's questions I need to ask about every type of plan that I'm offering, and making sure I've thought through all the implications of these, including where does this fit relative to our philosophy about value sharing in the company? So another way that you want to think about this is, to quote Peter Drucker here, he said, "The manager's job is to keep his nose to the grindstone while lifting his eyes to the hills." And what he meant by that was every business has to operate in 2 modes at the same time. And if you're a CEO, you know exactly what I mean by that, right? You're thinking about producing results today, but where do we need to be tomorrow? And we can't do anything today that's going to prevent us from getting where we need to be tomorrow. So that's why this balance is so critical. So we tell our clients, you want to think about your compensation plan as you would a compensation portfolio. If you have an investment portfolio, what do? Well, you define what is my investment philosophy? What is this portfolio for? What is it being created to fund down the line, so to speak? And that's going to drive what asset classes you put into that investment portfolio. And if you have a good investment manager, as the economy does its thing over time, that investment manager to come in and say, hey, we're going to pull out all the asset classes and put new asset classes in, right? Because that investment manager already anticipated there's going to be volatility out there. And that's why we have kind of a diversified approach that we're taking. So when there's volatility, what happens? Well, that investment manager suggests a reallocation of your asset, different weighting to your asset classes. You don't pull them all out and put new ones in. It says, no, okay, well, maybe we're going to have a little bit more on this side over here and a little bit less on this side. And that's the way you want to view your compensation as well. Finally, number 5, then, we want to, with all of that in mind, when we talk to our people, and particularly those that we're recruiting, we want to communicate a growth partnership. And growth partnership assumes that we recognize our need of those people to achieve our future goals, but that we want them to see their role in the organization the same way, that if we want to achieve everything that you want financially, then the company needs to be able to achieve its financial goals as well. So in VisionLink, we preach this all the time to our clients, this growth partner philosophy, and this belief that your people are really essential to the achievement of any of your growth goals, right? They're the ones that are interacting with your customers or clients. They're typically going to be the source of some of the best people you want to recruit. They kind of make a decision whether you're going to thrive or die in a given economic cycle, or certainly in this pace of change that we're all engaged in right now. So they decide every day whether to be your growth partners or growth inhibitors. So you want to cultivate that philosophy. So it's a desire that you have to align the organizational employee purpose and values, and a commitment to the employee role and stewardship success. You want them to succeed. You need them to succeed. It's the intent you have to offer a pay offering that aligns the company and employee financial interests and goals, so they see in helping the company succeed financially how it's helping them succeed in reaching their financial ambitions as well. And then it's this willingness you have to share value with value creators, and a desire to do so, because once you get that concept, you go, well, yeah, if we can reach these thresholds, I'm more than happy to write those value sharing checks, because they're being self-financed. So when you sit down with your new recruit, for example, and you've got this whole framework in mind now that we've just been talking about, here's the conversation you're able to have with that person. Here's our future. Here's where the company's going. Here's how we're going to get here. Here's our business strategy and our business model and how we're going to make that happen. Now, here's the role we picture for you in that strategy and in that model. And this is what we expect of you in that role. Here's how we encourage our people to grow and contribute here. Here's our philosophy about how we pay our people, what they're rewarded for in the company. Now, here's the specific pay programs you're going to participate in. And here's how our pay programs will work for you if we achieve our plan, if we all create value together and are able to drive this wealth multiple that you've heard me talk about. Now, that's going to be easier if you have something such as what we call an employee value statement. Employee value statement is not one of these historical documents that looks back at last year and says, here's what you were paid, here's what your benefits were worth, here's the value of your relationship with us in the past year or so. It's forward-looking. an employee value statement says, here's where we're going over the next 5 years, like I just told you. Now, here's what your compensation offering looks like. You're participating in a salary. You have a short-term value sharing plan. You also have a long-term value sharing plan. You can participate in our 401k plan. So here's the total cash that's going to be paid out to you if we achieve the kind of value creation thresholds we've talked about. Here's what kind of wealth is being accrued towards you. So here's the total value of your relationship over the next 5 years. I just want you to understand, this is not a $160,000 position we're asking you to take. This is a role that can generate $1.7 million for you over the next 5 years if we can work together in what we're creating here, or whatever the numbers would be for your company. Well, if that's going to happen inside of a company, you have to get this concept in mind that the role of compensation is to build a unified financial business vision for growing the business. That requires you to have this kind of growth partner relationship we've been talking about with your people. And using compensation as a way to reinforce that. If you're going to pull all this off, yeah, well, here's the question. What's your compensation operating system? Most companies don't have one, which goes back to my original slides when I said, well, this is one of the frustrations of CEOs is that they're saying, yeah, I don't have visibility, Ken, into all these things you're talking about today. I'm too often feel like I'm flying blind. So a compensation operating system needs to allow you to kind of assess what you have already. What do we have going on? What's working? What's not working? Where are our gaps? Where are we relative to market pay? Where should we be? What's our philosophy and so forth? Then it needs to allow you to create a plan design, then model it, test it. How does this look in our relative to cash flow? What does this look like on our P&L if we're doing this? What's the impact we think in terms of what we're going to drive for shareholder value and so forth? Are we making sure we're covering all the governance issues here? Are we de-risking ourselves legally and financially here? And is everything lined up tax-wise for the way it needs to be? What about plan communication and reporting? We're going to be able to roll this out, report to our employees. How are they going to know what they have? Are we going to have the software to operate all of this? And then are we going to be able to measure what we're doing? Are we going to be able to see if we're getting the outcomes we're looking for and the ROI analysis that we need that tells us whether or not we're driving the productivity profit that we need? Well, it may not surprise you that that's what we do. That's what VisionLink does. So forgive the little commercial there, but we've developed that compensation operating system. That's why companies, over 1,200 companies, work with this, is because we've figured all that out. We have all the software. We have the systems and processes in place to deal with all those kinds of issues so you can get the result that we're looking at today. So there you have it. Those are the 5 rules for pay systems that reinforce performance standards: define value creation, articulate a clear pay philosophy, transition to value sharing, provide a balanced pay offering, and communicate a growth partnership. So with that, we want to open it up. We have just 4 minutes for questions, so we can turn it over to Kathy here. And Marley, I'll bring you back on to ask the question. You're going to see a poll at Marley mentioned earlier popping up on the right. Please take a minute to answer that. I think it's just 2 questions as I recall, and it's how did I do? And if you want any more information about VisionLink, you indicate that there as well. But Marley, any questions that we have today?
We do have a couple of questions for you, Ken, and I'm really excited. We probably just have time for 1 or maybe 2.
Okay.
I'm really specifically excited about this one because it feels very relevant. What role is AI playing in building compensation plans these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me answer it this way. We use AI extensively in our business, as well as in our plan design. And I think the way that you want to think about AI relative to compensation these days is as a data gatherer, a data assessor, but you don't want it exercising judgment for you about how you should be paying your people. So if you look at the kinds of the issues that we were talking about today, if you're doing market pay assessments, sometimes if you plug that data you receive into there, it can help you do some interpolation. It can help you look at things such as, are we okay relative to pay equity requirements in our state, pay transparency requirements. When it comes into making judgments about what our philosophy should be, what the balance should be of certain things, you need human judgment for those. So you want to make sure you use it as an accelerator, but not as a replacement for the kind of judgment that you need on some of these issues. I could go on further, but I think that's kind of a general way to think about it.
I think that's a great viewpoint, using AI to enhance what the humans are doing.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
I think we've got time for just one more question for you, Ken.
Okay.
Another great one. How do you balance shareholder and employee financial interests with a pay strategy?
A great question. And that might have come before I did the productivity profit explanation, but that really is the way that you do that. If you think about just that sequence, defining value creation, that's inward focus first. It's just the company saying, well, this is what we need to hit. We need to hit these standards so that we don't make ourselves and our shareholders financially vulnerable. Then we need to have a philosophy about how we share that. We just take those two things alone. Now you're starting to align shareholder interests with the employee interests, because the employee interest now is when you have a conversation where somebody comes in and says, hey, I'm looking at this market pay data, and it says that I should be paid this. We say, oh, well, that's interesting. We look at that kind of data too, but let me remind you what our philosophy is here about how people are rewarded. And so you walk them through that whole philosophy. Here's just how we define value creation. This is how your role impacts that. And so if we want to have increased earnings, it doesn't happen just promotion. It happens with us working together to meet these thresholds. Remember we talked about productivity profit? We've been doing pretty good with that. But the more we can increase that productivity profit, the more you're going to share in that. So you want to think about it as you allow us to increase our productivity profit, your earnings are going to increase as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ken, and for all of these incredible insights you've shared with us today.
Thank you, Marley. And you're doing great as well. Keep up the good work.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I'm now